winter doth succeed, and leaves the naked trees to dress. The earth all black is clothed in green, and sunshine each their joy express. My sons returned with healing wings.
Welcome to Exploring the Arts. I'm your host, Ed Colley, and today I have with me my co-host, Julia Perry. Welcome, Julia, to co-hosting Exploring the Arts.
Hey.
Today, we're going to talk about a play about Anne Bradstreet, who was one of the first American poets in this country. But before I begin, I want to tell you where I saw this play. I went to the Whipple House here in Ipswich, walked into the door, and literally walked into the 1670s. From the author to my husband, written by my guest.
I'm Kristina Wacome Stevick.
Yes, and Kimberly LaCroix and Tess McKinley. All right, how did you get together for this play in the first place? How did it all come about?
As my littles were born and I was, raising them up into toddlers and older kids, and then going from my first to my second, Anne's biography and words kept coming back to me. I had done some academic work with her beforehand, so she was fresh in my mind, but I kept going back to her life story because I was feeling these points of connection. It was Anne Bradstreet's 400th birthday in 2012, and I decided to write a play for that, and we staged it at Pioneer Village in Salem. And then somebody who saw it there then just kind of out of the blue contacted me this summer and said, hey, I'm in touch with these women in Ipswich at the Ipswich Museum, and I think we should apply for a grant and see if we can get one.
Basically, what's the play about?
The play is about this really fascinating woman who came to America as a young woman. She grew up in England, married the love of her life at a fairly young age, even for Puritans in the 17th century, at 16 years old. Remained desperately in love with him for her whole life. They immigrated in 1630 and were fundamental in starting several communities in the area, Ipswich being one of them. It's written as if she's confiding to her husband, Simon, over those years until her death.
The show is written with 4 women all playing Anne Bradstreet, and they're all on stage the entire time. As Kristina and I worked to cast the show, we knew we weren't going to have 4 women who looked identical. So we did just consider their height, how they held themselves, their kind of tone of voice. And then we also, through the rehearsal process, tried to work in subtle just physicalities. There's certain ways that we try to create cohesion among them.
As we progress through the play, we start with the youngest Anne and then move, chronologically in time. In those early scenes, as I'm observing or a part of the action, I'm looking back at a younger me. I can say, wow, I was a totally different person. And so when I look at these other 3 stages of Anne's life, I look back thinking, I remember me then. I remember me innocent, without the knowledge and the depth of understanding that I have now. And I do that myself personally.
I remember Kim texting me after probably the first rehearsal and saying something along the lines of, these women they share a kind of essence, like there's a sort of way of being in the world that is in kind of in family to each other, and that was really pleasing.
The interesting thing about the piece from an actor's perspective is it's very abstract. You saw it, so there's 4 people playing the same role at different times in their life. But as a performer, you can't play abstraction. You can only play what's human and what's real and what's true. We have just tried to find what is the truth of Anne at this point in her development as a writer, an artist, a mother, a grandmother. Things that the elder Anne would have written are things about family, things about that she experienced daily. So it's as though in her progression as a human being, she discovers that what's really important is relationship, and most specifically for her, family.
I think in a lot of ways it uses telling Anne Bradstreet's story to engage all of us and talk about the distance we keep from others and even from ourselves. She loves her husband, but she feels a distance from him. She loves her family, but she doesn't understand certain members. She comes to love where she lives, but she feels ostracized from her community because of her work. So it's until she starts coming to terms with these things that she can even find an intimacy with herself.
This whole aspect of, creating people and like creating her poetry and you creating this play, like, her being a mother and being an artist or an author. And you're also a mother and an author. And do you want to touch on that a little bit, or like just your experience?
Yeah, I mean, I think that she stuck out to me because of similarities that I feel with her. Or one of the things that really influenced the writing the most. My daughter was about a year old, and we were nursing in the middle of the night, and there's this kind of breath that happens when babies are nursing, because they're breathing through their noses, right? And there's a little pattern. But Anne's poetry was running through my head a lot of the time because I was running, because I was writing at that point. So my head, my heart, mine eyes, my et cetera, I could hear this in Yelena's. And then when a baby comes off of the breast, or when they kind of fall into sleep, there's sometimes this kind of thing that happens, and that rhythm was in a later line of Anne's poem, and I was like, oh my gosh, this fits. And okay, I might be projecting, but I think I'm within my rights as a writer to do that, to say what if, as Anne's trying to make it all work, the writing and the mothering and all of this, if her material world, her children, the work of making dough or doing laundry or all those things is starting to influence the rhythm of her writing.
One critic I read said, her early poetry was really mimicking a lot of famous poets and poems, and then later in her life is where really she comes into her own, and her poetry has this strength and beauty to it. And it's because it starts reflecting her life.
Simon, what is she doing? Could you have seen such things in my sister Sarah? I'm glad my mother's in the past. It would have broken her heart to see her daughter's enthusiasms broadcast all over the streets of Boston. A prophesier, an adulterer, a heretic. If the king can be executed by his own people and a woman prophecy on the city streets, what's to stop the whole world from turning inside out? And what will happen to Sarah's little Anne?
I also really appreciated all of your creative choices, just physically having the play like in as the baby. If you want to talk about those creative choices.
I haven't seen it yet.
And that's so great. Good choice.
It's really nicely executed.
Well, and that came from a conversation. Kristina, in writing the piece, really did try to create a parallel that you've drawn on of creating people, motherhood, and the creative process of being an artist, being a poet. There's a labor scene in the show, and in that scene, there's an analogy that we use throughout the show of paper as Anne's kind of writing poems. Instead of writing, she's folding them into these origami birds. So even in the labor scene, as she's laboring, a bird is being folded, and so it's kind of trying to draw this parallel. And then the baby that is born is just a bundle of fabric. And the show continues, and that bundle of fabric is held by other Annes. And then at some point, it's passed back to her, and it's still a baby. And then there's a change of scene, and she receives it as if it's a gift that her husband has given her. And her published book is on the inside of it.
Oh, it cannot be.
she didn't know that her work was being published. It was her life's work, and it had been a bit controversial. To be a working mom now can be controversial, never mind in the 17th century.
She's like, oh, people are going to think I plagiarized this.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think she was afraid of that. And there is some controversy between biographers about whether she literally didn't know that it had been stolen away to go off to London to be published, or whether she was playing the role of self-effacing Puritan woman by sort of feigning that, that she didn't know, and that it was the work of the men, her minister, her brother-in-law, folks who had wrote all of these commendations in the beginning of the book.
So she didn't want to like disrupt this male-dominated world that she was living in, and that we might still be living in.
Well,
You think?
And it didn't go well for other women who did, right?
Right.
And there's reference to that throughout the show, that there are other women who try to use their voice in her community, and various forms of exile happen. Does
Do
that
you
make
really
sense?
think
It
Anne
does
was a
make a lot.
representative of women of that period? Do you think she really represented them?
No, I
mean,
think
she
she-
had some
I think-
freedoms that the others didn't have, right?
I think she stood out amongst them.
Do you really?
I do.
Yeah.
She had
I
an
do too.
education for one
She
thing.
had an
didn't
education. She had more money.
Yeah.
And she just was an artist, and artists tend to be distinctive. So, yeah.
There are, right here in Ipswich, the minister, Reverend Ward, who became sort of her mentor, would preach these sermons about how frivolous women were to spend money on ribbons and lace and stuff. And I think that wasn't who Anne was, right? She was an academic. She was, I think, kind of intense and an artistic temperament.
Can the modern woman relate to Anne, you think?
I hope they can. I hope they do. I hope they do see the parallels, and that they don't leave saying, well, we've come a long way, baby.
Right.
My hope as a performer is for the audience not to say, that was then, this is now.
And I think for all of us involved, we felt very kind of indebted and connected to her. I think we have a way of idolizing those who have gone before, and kind of setting apart. But what she presents is someone who loves her husband, and she feels isolated, and she, believes in her faith, but she has struggles with doubt, and she wants to create, but she doesn't. But she feels isolated by that even as well. So I for all of us, we felt very connected to her, and I think if we've done our job, hopefully the audience will as well.
You could literally play this as modern women.
Yeah.
As women of today, I think. Is a modern woman liberated now? Is she free? Is she where she wants to be?
We've got some work to do, but it's certainly a lot better than the 17th century.
You said we could do this as a modern play, but I think it would be different. If you think freedom is doing whatever you want to do, then you would have a very embittered, angry Anne. And she wasn't embittered.
Yeah.
But her freedom was found within the context of what her life was, the hierarchy of her husband working and a faith that she had in God. And so within that accepted system, she flourished and was free. But I think today's modern woman might feel that way, but might kick against the goads and say, husband, you're not home, 50-50, you're gonna watch the kids, and I'm going out. And I'm not saying there's anything wrong with having a 50-50 relationship or equality either, but when it gets to be a tit for tat, I'll give as far as you give me, rather than I give you because I love you, and therein I find my freedom. And whatever that means, if it means sacrifice and you're not home and I raise 8 kids alone, my sacrifice is my freedom. But I don't know that a lot of modern women would say, I find my freedom within that context.
It also has to do with what she wanted. I mean, we know from Anne's poetry early on that she desperately wanted to be a mom. So having children was something that she really prized and valued. And that's certainly something that in the 17th century, for a Puritan woman here in the New World, was deeply valued because the idea was to populate, the New World with young Christians to, subdue the earth. And but I think she genuinely wanted that too. She wasn't just playing her part. To your question about whether women are free now, I'm glad that I live now. I'm glad that I'm married to a man who doesn't actually want to be like the head, the way doesn't think of like submission the way several prior generations have.
You think men are learning?
I think some men are.
But not all, huh?
Certainly not all, no. Yeah. But I think it's difficult for both men and women now because the roles are so murky and undefined.
She found her freedom in her belief system and kind of the hierarchy and in her sacrifice in a lot of ways. If you see sacrifice as the opposite of freedom, then those are going to be really difficult roles, being a wife and being a mom, I think. And I think that's a challenge for the modern woman, because we want to be free in a way that I don't know actually maybe provides happiness.
The duration, the distance from you, the animal spirits of pregnancy and nursing perhaps drove me to such thinking. The fact that I could rarely share with you what was on my heart when it occurred to me, and often when you came home, it seemed like we were becoming reacquainted. Even then, you didn't understand my melancholy. I love you.
What did you like about her the best, playing her? What was about her personality, character?
Did you
really
like playing her?
I love playing her. Kristina's written Elder Anne with all of the colors of her humanity, the depth of her passion, her love for her grandchildren, her delight in her husband, her physical illness, her agony over the loss, so many deaths of those that she loved. So it's a real spectrum.
There was one thing in that thing that you did that just tore me up, where you said that you wanted your husband to go out and find somebody else. You didn't want him to be alone.
Simon, will you come sit beside me? I told you once that I couldn't bear to think of you with another wife. I couldn't endure the thought of someone else bringing up our children. Well, now they're grown, and some of them are widowers even in their youth. I see I was selfish. Why shouldn't they? Why shouldn't you have a spouse who loves you when your first love has died?
Well, Kristina wrote a line, I see now that I was selfish. And when I look back at previous Annes in my previous life, there is an element of selfishness. No, this is mine. And as she becomes older, she, like I said, holds those things much more lightly. And so I see now that I was selfish. It's time for me to not think about what I want, but what is best for my sons, my daughters-in-law, my husband, to be selfless.
I still feel, I'm not eldest Anne yet, so I still feel very like mine. I'm like my 2-year-old mine, I want mine, with my husband and with my babies. But I think that a lot of motherhood trains you to grow up a little bit and let go of those things, to live selflessly. And that's, again, I think the gift that she gives modern audiences.
Nice work, writer.
Oh,
Yeah.
thank you.
Yes, bravo.
Do you have any other shows coming up? Anything you want to promote here?
I mean, we always have Cry Innocent, The People versus Bridget, running downtown in Salem. I'm working on a new piece about the Hawthorns when they were in Rome in the year 1858. Some similar themes, a little bit more about sort of the presentation of the self, conflict between artists and egos. It's a bit of a coming-of-age story about the the eldest Hawthorne child. And that's kind of where my head has been more recently. Yeah, although Anne keeps coming up.
You see, this is what's great about a play. We can all sit around. We've all been experienced it. We as viewers, as audience, you as the creators, and we can talk about it. It brings up all kinds of ideas and feelings and emotions, and I think that's what a good play does. Totally enjoyed it, and thank you so much for coming to Exploring the Arts.
Thank you both.
Thank you.
That's it for us today. See you soon.
Perfume, a core of carcass down it lies, a glorious